Hey, it's another sunny, warm afternoon here in Germany, so naturally I'm sat by my fireplace. I'm here today to talk to you about art. And specifically, I want to talk about the relationship between art and artists with regard to non-linearity and the responsibility the audience has to challenge retconning or to challenge a reframing of a piece of art. Now, there are a variety of ways in which art is interacted with in a non-linear fashion. Sometimes artists go back and straight up change things in a pre-existing piece of art. Sometimes information comes out at a later date which influences people's perception of art. Or sometimes, even after years, fans can find Easter eggs that are hidden in films. Other times, new entries in a film's chronology might alter or play around with things that happened in previous parts of the canon. Or occasionally an artist will even revisit their work, tell the audience more about it, explain what their mindset was, what themes they were trying to tackle, any symbolism. And other artists are David Lynch. And of course, even amongst these rough ways in which art can be played around with, some things affect the art itself or the perception of the art more than others. But in some cases, the revelation or the alteration doesn't actually affect the art very much at all, or at all. And if the art itself remains unaffected, then what is the purpose of changing it at all? Or is it more to do with the artists themselves? So before we get into exactly what I want to talk about today, I'm just going to go through a few little examples of ways art has been played around with and ways in which it can be played around with, just to have some grounding, because some grounding is always nice. So the first thing I want to talk about is just plain old retconning. Now, retconning is short for retroactive continuity. Wow, I nailed it first time. This is the act of either using a new piece of art in a chronology or making a statement about an old piece of art that overwrites or rewrites something that has already happened. It changes essentially the past. It alters the canon. Of course, this has to come from somebody who has appropriate authority over the canon in order to make it official. I couldn't just make up something about something I have no claim over. That's not to say that you can not explore alternatives to an official route that a story takes. I mean, fan fiction is very popular. A lot of artists and creators have varying opinions on fan fiction. Some see it as, a nice gateway for someone who's exploring creating to play around with pieces that they are already familiar with, things they don't have to create for themselves. It can be a learning process. And there are some really good fan fiction out there. So I hear. There are some artists, on the other hand, who've gone so far as to threaten legal action against people for using their characters without permission, which is kind of sad, to be honest. It's a bad look. But yeah, nevertheless, fan fiction is a sort of retconning sometimes. Retconning can insert truths into a narrative in a way that sometimes alters a previous narrative, and sometimes it doesn't alter a previous narrative. Or the way it alters the previous narrative doesn't really change the original piece of art very much. A good example of that would be Blade Runner 2049. Because in later film, you find out that Rachel, the replicant from the first film, has had a child, something that you had no idea was possible during the events of the original film. However, that being possible doesn't actually change any of the events of the original film. It simply supplants a new narrative over the old one, which allows the story to continue in a new direction. Or you can do an X-Men Days of Future Past and completely just rewrite whole movies as if they didn't exist. But not everyone goes that far out of their way to cover up past mistakes. And sometimes it doesn't even come from a new piece of art at all. Sometimes the creator will just go back and make a statement offhand about something that sometimes is alluded to in the story or hinted at, and they're just confirming fan theory, and then sometimes it just comes out of nowhere and just, what? Now, obviously, when the art itself is changed in some way, or the narrative of the art is changed at a later date, then that is some sort of retcon or revisionism. But on the other hand, if it's simply information about the artist and what they were thinking, then it moves away from that. You're not actually changing the art anymore. So it's more of a narrative reframing. For instance, if an artist reveals something about themselves, which allows an audience to revisit their work and view it through new lens, allowing them to possibly uncover more meaning in the film, or uncover hidden references or ideas or elements of narrative that might have previously gone unnoticed, and that can usually only be a good thing. It's not often that creators will go back and change a lot about their work, because most of the time they're not afforded the opportunity to, and if they don't have the means with which to go back and actually give these changes life and recreate them as their original vision was intended, then it can come across as confusing or even insulting to the audience if, for some arbitrary reason, a lot of aspects of a pre-existing piece of art are changed, especially if there's no evidence that those were fully developed ideas that were ever supposed to be in the art in the first place. If anything, that absence from the original piece of art shows that they weren't really fully developed ideas that they wanted to include. Looking at you, Joanne. No, I really don't want to get into Harry Potter discourse, because why? But it does afford a neat little opportunity to juxtapose a TERF versus trans creators. So I guess you're wondering why I brought you here today. And yes, I have an agenda. And it's the trans agenda. Depending on how much you've been paying attention, you may have seen that recently in an interview, Lily Wachowski revealed, nay, confirmed, that there are definitely aspects of the trans experience that ended up working their way into the narrative of the Matrix due to the fact that they're both trans, though it was coming from a closeted perspective because neither of them were out at the time. Now, since this happened, I've run into a few people who are trying to compare this to the whole big 2007 Dumbledore is gay thing. However, other than both of these revelations having tangential relations to queerness, I don't see any other ways in which these comparisons really hold water. For starters, Lily's statements were pretty vague, just deferring to fans' own interpretations, which had sort of gained traction online since her appearance at the 2016 GLAAD Media Awards, after years of avoiding the public spotlight. She said in the speech that she and her sister were happy to see fans going back through their work and exploring it through the lens of their transness, whilst not mentioning any films in particular. Whereas something like Dumbledore is gay is absolute. It affects a character specifically. Though in this case, it didn't really do much to develop the character, though I haven't seen Crimes of Grindelwald, because why? But I've heard that it didn't really explore the relationship at all anyway, so this is without any real representation other than lip service. Not to mention the other, dozen ridiculous things that she's come out with since. The last time I checked, J.K. Rowling was a straight cis woman, which means she would neither be drawing from personal experience of being a gay man, and without that experience being a significant part of the creator's life, there's not going to be any subtext coming up from their own experience. On the other hand, unless you're specifically trying to avoid doing so, any artist is going to end up with bits of themselves showing themselves or revealing themselves in their art. So if you're a queer person, then you're going to at some point draw from some queer experience to inform your art. And though the sisters did say outright that they're not sure exactly how much they were working into their art intentionally and how much was coming from the subconscious, it does at least make sense that there is a subconscious there to draw from. Likewise, I've seen people say, well, The Matrix came out in 1999. Surely, if this was the case, then people would have realized it sooner, or they would have come out and said something sooner. And that one seems kind of simple, actually. In 1999, how mainstream was knowledge of the trans experience? Real, actual knowledge. Even in 2020, people really, for the most part, still don't know very much. They're still quite ignorant. So, what were the chances of people 2 decades ago, or in the years following, analyzing a science fiction martial arts film through a queer lens or a trans lens? Do you really think the average person watching a dystopian sci-fi film in 1999 about robots that have taken over society was really going to stop and say, wow, the transformative idea of them entering the Matrix really reminds me of the struggles trans people go through in their everyday life? I mean, maybe there was one. I don't know. We live in a weird world. The Matrix was pretty damn popular. It was pretty mainstream. I don't think people would have been looking for it. People weren't going to see the red pill in 1999 and go, hey, that's definitely an allegory for estrogen. Not only that, but do you think a major studio would have funded a film knowing it was an open trans allegory in the 90s? And considering the one character, Switch, who was supposed to change gender upon entering the Matrix, was ultimately just turned into an androgynous woman, really shows that they weren't going to go for that. And for the people who are like, well, it came out in 1999, why are they just talking about this now? There's a new movie on the way. It's all just a big marketing ploy. Are you really that cynical? And yeah, you're right. If you really want to jump to the most cynical conclusion first, then sure. Maybe every single artist is just out for themselves, looking to make money, and they'll lie about anything to make $1, but that's really sad. But as I said, this is something that has been fan theory for half a decade. People have been talking about it. It's something that's been hinted about multiple times. This year isn't the first time that they're saying something like this. So it seems like a bit of a long commitment to pandering for a very minimal return. This is something the fans worked out for themselves. It wasn't imposed on them. People have been theorizing about it for long enough since the directors came out following the release of the films. It's not exactly an out-of-the-blue retcon. It's nice that people today, when they release their art, don't have to hide who they are so much. But making older art off-limits because people lie sometimes seems a bit ridiculous. The funniest of all is the alt-right dudes who are super upset about the whole red pill estrogen thing. Not only because it dramatically changes the alt-right canon of being based in red pill, but because these people seem to have forgotten their own conspiracy theories in the process. every bit of mainstream liberal media is meant to be pushing this whole gay agenda thing, right? Like, that's what they believe. To see the same people who pull the most bullshit reasons out of thin air to attack anything as containing an LGBTQ agenda, just suddenly switch sides and be like, no, I like this film too much. You can't take it away from me. I don't care if you're the creators. I want the term red pill. Like, they're so insecure about it. It's just fucking hilarious. I love it. I'm not saying I approve peddling conspiracy theories about the liberal agenda, but if you're gonna be a conspiracy theorist, at least be consistent. Like, come on, if someone gives you free ammunition to support your conspiracy theory, why not take it? Why has this piece got you in such a confused space? Doesn't seem like you're so committed to that conspiracy after all, are you? Ultimately, a lot of the criticism just comes down to why now, and other artists have previously pandered and lied in the past, so now we shouldn't trust anyone who stands to gain absolutely anything from discussing their art retrospectively, with people more so skeptical of any revelations that would score a person woke points, because that just doesn't stop people discussing the themes of their work, right? Has to be pandering. There's no way it can be genuine at all. And if your view of the world is so cynical that your first thought is anyone who stands to gain anything from making a revelation about that art cannot be trusted, I think you've really lost touch with just humanity. And yes, people do pander, people do lie about their art, but that doesn't mean we should write off all creators from making even slightly controversial statements about their art, especially if the claim reflects a piece of that actual creator's identity, as all art contains pieces of its creators, and removing people's ability to freely discuss their art or revisit their art when they're ready, out of spite for the handful of times that artists have been caught pandering, is gonna hurt the art community more than help it, especially amongst the people who do need to use their art to explore their identity. Also, the gains here are perhaps slightly more people will have interest in the new Matrix film, and maybe a few people will go back and rewatch it. Like, it's not exactly a big money maker to announce that there are trans themes in your work, and I'm pretty sure just by the virtue of being mainstream creators and being trans, the Wachowski already draw a lot of the trans audience. So ultimately, I don't see this as a cynical move for media relevancy. Of course, maybe I'm wrong. And maybe every single creator is a cynical, money-hungry person. And if I'm proven wrong, I will admit that. But right now, I am not that cynical. So I will take my last bit of faith in humanity and hold on to it. And share it. Peace.